Hello everyone, this is Jotto bringing you the HearthStone Weekly, bringing you the top decks, bringing you the most interesting cards, and bringing you my opinions on the state of the metagame for this week's tournament. So, without further ado, let's get started, shall we? On to the honorable mentions. We had a top 16 this week. For the first time ever on US, we've had one on EU, and also the tournaments have been getting pretty big recently. Over the weekend, we had 154 people between both tournaments, so it's nice to see people sort of jumping on the competitive scene. But anyway, 9th place Decision Music, 10th place Reels, 11th place Dragonuts, 12th place Guile, 13th place Lockth, 14th place Ixar, 15th place Protec, and 16th place Pickles. Now, on to the top 8. We had first place Amaz, second place Easy Mode, third place Spo, fourth place Evo, fifth place Christopher, sixth place Dominance, seventh place Krond, and eighth place Spaj TFU. On to Spaj's deck. Now, Spaj has been traditionally known for a Shaman mid-range deck. This week it was Warrior and Rage. Interesting to see a new deck out of this guy. Very well accomplished player. So basically it's an enraged deck that revolves around things with charge, weapons, and also things like Inner Rage, Cruel Taskmaster, and just drawing through to your threats with things like Shield Block, and also the synergy between Shield Block and Shield Slam is a big deal. That's 5 damage and you draw a card. 4 mana. Very good combo between those two. Sen'jin Shieldmaster is chilling out here, giving some protection early. Kor'kron Elite is one of the most powerful charge minions in the game. Just a note, Inner Rage and Cruel Taskmaster can be used as removal. They can be used as ping effects. Specifically Cruel Taskmaster. Why? Because he gives you a 2-2 body with him, so he's just like an Elven Archer essentially for 2 mana. But anyway, besides that, very well rounded deck. This has been tested a lot. As you can tell by the fact that there are only a few 1-ofs, and the 1-ofs make a lot of sense. There's a lot of 2-ofs, but there's some 2-ofs which you just think, why is there 2 of these? And it's because it's been tested a lot. Things like Ooze, it's because this deck has a big weakness to weapons. You need the double Ooze, most people play 1, but you need the 2 Oozes, and that's the hallmark of a well-tested deck. On to 7th place, Krond playing a Paladin Control deck. Now, Paladin Control is an archetype which we see every so often. This one was playing things like Lay on Hands, Guardian of Kings, Ragnaros, and Ysera, chilling out with Tyrion Fordring, the core of all these control decks. Aldor, Peacekeeper, and Emperor Cobra function as sort of pseudo-assassinates. Consecration, you need the AoE. Harrison Jones provides some more draw power, because the aim of Paladin Control is literally just to draw into your win conditions. It's a very sort of stereotypical control deck where you just draw into your win conditions, and that's how you win the game. Essentially, you just keep drawing and healing. Sylvanas Windrunner steals your opponent's threats. True Silver Champion gives you some life gain, gets rid of a lot of things. Equality and Humility, pseudo-assassinate effects. Hammer of Wrath gives you some draw power. Black Knight, pseudo-assassinate effect, does a lot of assassinate type effects in this deck because paladins don't really have access to a straight kill it spell. They need to run sort of ways around it. They have a lot of life gain and draw, but they don't have the kill it spell effectively. They don't have any Siphon Souls, so you need to run some sort of ways around that, get some combos going to get rid of these big threats. On to 6th place, Dominance, a Priest combo control deck. Now, combo control is effectively the double it combo, is what a lot of people have been referring it to, playing the Divine Spirits and Lightwell and Inner Fire and things like that. However, if you think that's the only way of winning, then you'd be sorely mistaken. This deck also plays things like Prophet Velen, Nozdormu. I just want to point out, Nozdormu. This normally would be Alexstrasza or something, but kudos to Dominance to getting a Nozdormu in top 8. I mean, seriously. Really? Nozdormu? That actually made my day when I came across that on the deck list. Kudos to that. Temple Enforcer is a really good 6-drop. Buffs out your mid-game minions, your late-game minions. Pretty much always good past turn 6. 1 of Holy Fire, because you don't want them clogging your hand. Cabal Shadow Priest deals with the small things, while Holy Fire deals with the big things. Argent Commander, very versatile minion, played in most decks nowadays just because versatility as a removal spell, and also as a 2-for-1. One of each of the Shadow Words Pain is normally played as a 2 of. Death is normally played as a 1 of or 2 of, but in this deck he only had 2 spaces, so he needs to play 1 of each. A lot of 1 ofs in this deck because there's a lot to get in there. The shadow words, Death, sometimes you have 2, they just can't target things in aggro decks and it gets a bit awkward. Pain, similar story against control decks. 1 of Silence, it's a free spell, gives him some extra combo potential if he needs to silence something to get his combo through with Lightspawn and things like that. Power Word Shield, the new one, is very powerful. Northshire Cleric. This is basically the go-to priest combo deck if you want to look at a well-refined one. This has many ways of getting the combo off. It's not just relying on a couple of different cards. On to 5th place, Christopher playing a priest mid-range deck. Now this is more of a mid-range to late game deck, but there is a lot of mid-range in this deck. You have Injured Blade Master, Fairy Dragon, very effective against priest. They deal with the mirror quite well, which is nice because late to mid game decks have issues against priest, even if they are playing priest. Injured Blade Master and Fairy Dragon are pretty much impossible to deal with spells as far as priests are concerned, short of Holy Nova. Shadow Word Pain chilling out in here. Holy Smite, very effective against these aggro decks. You pretty much need them. Same with Scarlet Crusader. 1 of Chillwind Yeti, it's big body in the middle of the game. Senjin, he's basically the true taunt minion. Helps out a lot, not too slow, just an amazing minion. Obviously 2 of Mind Control, that's just what happens in priest decks. That's a tremendously good card. Almost compulsory as a 2 of. You can get away with 1 however if you need to. Prophet Velen, very powerful now with the hero power change. Also, Ragnaros and Ysera, the duo that seems to show up in every single mid to late game deck. Why? Because they synergize perfectly. I talked about this last week, I'll go over it quickly now. Ysera comes down after Ragnaros. If they hexed the Ragnaros or polymorphed it or assassinated it, it already did 8 damage. Then Ysera comes down, draws you a card that's probably going to change the game, and then that gets removed. Effectively, you just killed something on the board with Ragnaros, got it removed, played Ysera, and you just 2-for-1'd twice. At that point, it's very difficult to come back for your opponent. On to 4th place, Evo, or Threvo, playing a Mage Secret Control deck. Now this is a deck which hasn't shown up in ages. This is a very old school deck, Mage Secret. This hasn't really been a force in a metagame since the original spoiling of the cards back in Cockatrice. It's amazing to see this kind of deck come back. Love to see it. So basically, a basic rundown is you have things like Ethereal Arcanist, Kirin Tor Mages, Archmage Antonidas. The secrets protect these 3. You get free secrets with Kirin Tor. Ethereal Arcanist is an amazing follow-up to Kirin Tor because if they don't trigger the secret, then you just get a 5/5 on turn 4. If they do trigger it, then you're ahead anyway. Very good synergy there. The Fireballs help out with the burn, polymorph, basically compulsory in these mage decks. Water Elemental holds down the mid game, very good against weapon classes. Azure Drake, one of the best 5-drops in the game. Archmage Antonidas, essentially a win condition. You play this, play a protective secret, they have some serious issues dealing with it. Very interesting deck, one that a lot of people will not be expecting because this is a very unique deck nowadays. On to 3rd place, Spo playing a Druid mid-range beatdown deck. Spo is back to his Druid. He played Priest for a little bit, now he's back to his Druid, now that he has all the cards he needs. Now this is a very sort of earlier version of a mid-range deck, playing things like Twilight Drake, Druid of the Claw, Azure Drake, Earthen Ring Farseers, Young Brewmasters, Faceless Manipulators, Arching Commanders. These are earlier in the game mid-range minions. The latest thing in the deck is Ancient of Lore, which is used to sort of get you back in the game against aggro. Also very good with the card draw if you need it. The mid-range beatdown deck has been around for a long time, various iterations. This is one of the fastest ones I've ever seen. Playing things like Harvest Golem is an interesting tech in here, helps against aggro, but most of this stuff is designed to just get damage through in the mid game and kill them in the mid game. There's not really a late game strategy because it doesn't need to. It just forces through damage between turn 5 and 10 and just kills your opponent. Even the 1 of Naturalize, possibly the most underestimated Druid card, does some serious work in these kind of decks. On to 2nd place, Izimo playing it's a Shaman deck. Easy. It's a Shaman deck. Yeah, for anyone who doesn't know, Easy is like the ultimate priest player of all time. So this was a bit surprising for me, as you can probably imagine, seeing him go, oh look, it's a Shaman deck. Anyway, onto the Shaman deck, shall we? It's a Shaman aggro deck. Feral Spirits, Flame Tongue Totem, Knife Juggler, Direwolf Alpha, buff all your things, smash them in the face. Playing basic removal, things like Earthshock, Lightning Bolt, Rock Biter Weapon. Don't need that much removal in this situation, because the more removal you play, the less minions you have. Short of things like Lightning Storm, not much removal you want to play besides the basic ones. Bloodlust is a very good out to win the game out of nowhere. Frostwolf Warlord, Silverhand Knight, Fire Elemental put on pressure in the mid and late game. Shadowed Sun Cleric buffs up your things. Mana Tide Totem gives you some draw power that they won't be expecting. Acidic Swamp Oozes deals with the early game weapons that you just can't deal with in this kind of deck. Not to mention things like Imp Master. If you get an Imp Master and then Bloodlust 2 turns later and they haven't dealt with it, it's basically good game. This is a deck that hasn't shown up very much. It's a deck that I would love to try and test out in these tournaments, but I didn't get the chance to, and easy ended up playing it. Different variation, but interesting to see that someone else is trying to get this kind of deck to work. And I really like my aggro decks, and this is a Shaman aggro deck that I haven't seen in a long time. On to first place, Amaz, playing a Paladin, sort of aggro to mid-game aggro deck. Now, Paladin is sort of the class that sneaks up on a lot of people, where it just quietly wins every tournament. It quietly wins sort of most tournaments, and it tends to be the only one there. It just happens to get the furthest. Paladin is a very consistent class, also very balanced, but it takes a lot of effort to go into these decks and actually come up with a really well-rounded one. So anyway, onto the deck. Things like Knife Juggler, pretty standard in these aggro decks, especially with Paladin. Your hero power turns on, it's amazing. Lay on Hands is the late game plan, gives you some more draw power, gets you back into the game. Imp Master, Shattered Sun Cleric, Blessing of Kings, some outs to some extra damage. Arcane Golem, just 4 damage to the face a lot of the time. Divine Favor, a lot of draw power out of nowhere. Single Iron Becal hanging out here, gets past Taunt and other nasty effects like Questing Adventurer that you just can't deal with. Noble Sacrifice protects your Knife Jugglers, that are pretty crucial to just triggering and killing them with all the triggers. Hammer of Wrath lets you draw, it doesn't take up a card, which is important in aggro decks, and just does 3 damage flat out. The interesting ones in this deck are Stormwind Champion, buffs all your small stuff. Venture Co-Mercenary, not many big things in this deck. Doesn't really hamper you, it's just a 7/6 for 5. The only thing it really stops is turn sort of 6 Faceless Manipulator, I guess, and it also hurts your Stormwind Champion on turn 7, but that's about it. The rest of the stuff you can still cast, it's amazing in this kind of deck. Faceless Manipulator, as I said before, Paladins have some issue getting over things, so what they do, they copy it. You copy their thing, you buff it up with Shadowed Sun Cleric, or for instance, Blessing of Kings, because you only spent 5 mana, he probably spent 9. Just think about that next time you play Faceless Manipulator. Onto the interesting cards, Twilight Drake. Now, Twilight Drake is a card that was defining the metagame essentially before it was changed, because it used to be a 1/1, but it gained +1/+1 instead of 1 health, so it was just incredibly swingy. It was a pretty badly designed card. The new version, however, hasn't played a lot. Why? Because of priests. Now, Twilight Drake effectively hampers priests now. It's incredibly difficult for them to deal with a turn 4 Twilight Drake, it's insane. Well, the overall change to Twilight Drake, whether it's buff or nerf, is irrelevant. Against some decks, it's a buff, against other decks, it's a nerf. That's irrelevant entirely. However, having that 4 attack helps against priests for control decks that they need something against priests. Having a high amount of health helps against a lot of other control and aggro decks. Very solid minion now, and it's no longer a case where you have to hold all your cards. It doesn't matter if it's a big card anymore, just play it as a 4/5 or 4/6, it'll do some work. Very good card nowadays, very good in these Warlock control decks as well, where you just play Twilight Drake as a 4/7 or 8 against a priest and they just can't do anything to it. Onto the second card, Ysera. I felt like I needed to talk about this one at some point, and might as well do it now, right? It's a 4/12 for 9. First glance, it doesn't die to priest. Gets mind controlled. Yeah, but anyway, it doesn't die to Shadow Words. Very difficult to deal with for priest as a result. 12 health, very difficult to deal with everyone else. At the end of your turn, draw a dream card. Now, the dream cards are each incredibly powerful. There's one which is Dream, where you can return any minion to your hand or any minion on their board to their hand for 0. There's Ysera Awakens, deal 5 damage to everything apart from Ysera. There's a 7/6 for 4, a Fairy Dragon, that's a 3/5. There's a lot of good dream cards. There's even a Power Overwhelming that's a 5/5. That's 5/5 instead of 4/4. It's an incredibly powerful card. No matter what it draws you, it's most likely gonna be useful. They have to deal with it as soon as it comes down, otherwise it's going to cause chaos. This is the kind of card which is a win condition on its own. If you play it and they don't kill it, it doesn't matter if it's only doing 4 damage a turn, those dream cards are nasty. If you pick up some Ysera Awakens in a priest deck, or in a warrior deck, or a warlock deck with some sustain, you just play it, wipe their board, do 5 damage to them, attack for 4, and then heal it all back up, and that's all you need to do. Very powerful card on its own. It's an amazing win condition, one of the most consistent win conditions, which is funny because it's a random dream card, but it cycles when you play it, gives you an incredibly powerful option, and then it has to be removed. Perfect as a win condition. Onto the Ethereal Arcanist. Now, Ethereal Arcanist is a card that never really saw some play. In Cockatrice, the simulator we used to play on, it played in some decks. Gimmicky, but it was played in a few decks. The problem was Mage Secrets was never really that good, and so this was directly not good, and then when it came back into the metagame back then, this was too gimmicky to see a lot of play. Silence was very popular at the time. But now, Silence is a little less popular. There's only 1 copy in most decks, not 2. You can get away with it a lot more. They don't have it sometimes. You just play it with Secret on the board. They don't know what that secret is. For all they care, it could be a Vaporize, a Counterspell, something that really does lock your options down. Even though, for all they know, it could just be an Ice Barrier. But that's not the point. The Ethereal Arcanist just keeps getting bigger. They have to throw stuff at it, go walk smack into the Secret. But if they don't trigger the Secret, it's going to get bigger every turn. It heals itself up effectively. It's a very powerful card in most situations. If it gets silenced, that's the only issue. However, Silence, as I said, is less popular nowadays than it used to be, sort of opening a little metagame slot for the Ethereal Arcanist to come up and just reign supreme in these Mage Secret decks for a little bit until sort of the metagame accommodates. The one problem with Ethereal Arcanist as a card is it can never really be super powerful in a metagame, because as soon as it does, this is what happened to Twilight Drake when it was super powerful and played in every single deck, is that Silence comes back into the metagame and shuts it down. But at the moment, Silence is down in its popularity. This is incredibly powerful, especially with things like Counterspell. So, as you saw, there's a lot of aggro decks now. There's a lot of control decks. Not that much mid-range. Mid-range has fallen down in popularity a bit, and I think it's mainly because Control have sort of been adapting these mid-range minions to hold off mid-range decks. And they've just been adapting into it, making them sort of slightly faster as control decks, but still relying on these win conditions late game. And that's been helping them out against mid-range decks a lot. It's sort of a, if you can't beat them, join them mentality, when you just adapt the Argent Commanders, adapt Sentient Shield Masters, and just beat the mid-range decks and get them into late game where you can win. And these aggro decks, with the last patch, nerfing a lot of the controlling aspects and also buffing a lot of the really cheap removal spells and some of the early game beatdown, it's very difficult to stop an aggro deck now with a mid-range deck. Things like Sentient Shield Master, and I never thought I'd say this, Sentient Shield Master is a 4 mana 3/5 with taunt and is too slow to hold back an aggro deck. That's incredible. Some of the aggro decks now can just go turn 1 Fairy Dragon, turn 2 Knife Juggler for example, and then just go turn 3 Injured Blade Master, you play your Senjin, and then they just Lava Burst it, or they Hex it, or Polymorph it and just walk past, or just Silence it and just smash you in the face for about 11. It's an incredibly fast format right now, and these control decks have been playing a lot more removal in the early game because they have to kill these early minions, otherwise they just can't live. But these aggro decks, they buffed them up a lot. Previous to the patch, aggro decks were really kind of gimmicky, they really didn't work as much, they needed a bit of an extra punch. Now I think they're slightly, they're kind of where they should be in the metagame, to be honest, where a well-tuned aggro deck will completely destroy everyone, as we saw, but you can't just throw an aggro deck together and expect to win, because it doesn't work that way. 90% of the skill involved in playing aggro decks is building the deck, and that's where a lot of these aggro decks fall short. Whereas control decks, a lot of the skill involves in actually playing them. There's a lot of deck building involved in control decks and mid-range decks, don't get me wrong, but there is a lot more skill in terms of playing. So if a control player makes a mistake in a game, you feel a lot more than if an aggro player makes a mistake. However, the deck design can be it's more impactful if you're playing. The faster the deck you play, the more the design matters because you see less cards. And that's sort of where we're at right now, where how well a deck is designed is dictating how well it's doing, whereas with these control decks, it's sort of more who makes the mistake, and that's who wins in these mirrors. It's a very interesting format right now. I will have to see how this goes. Interesting to see how it goes. I am curious how these decks are going to turn out in a couple of weeks. But anyway, onto the actual class attendance. There's a disturbing amount of mages right now. Only one made it into top 8, however. Between the EU and US tournaments, there were, I think, 17-18% mages, which is crazy. That's a lot of mages, actually. There was almost double the number of mages as there was priest, and I was a big surprise to a lot of people, but it's been going this way for a while now. Now, if you look at the attendance of things like Rogue, there were 2 Rogues out of 154 people. 2. And then last week, there were 3 Rogues. Week before, 1. Rogues are incredibly underplayed right now. No one wants to play that class because they're weaker than they used to be, so all the people who were playing them because they were overpowered don't play them. And because of the changes made, their tempo's different. So all the people who played Rogues because they enjoyed the class don't play them. So Rogues are in a weird spot right now where being underpowered or not is up for debate because no one wants to play them, which is an interesting state of affairs to say the least. The other sort of major offender is Druids. I mean, there's about double the number of Druids as Rogues, but that's not saying much when you're dealing with numbers of 1 and 2. Now, a Druid did make it into top 3 this time, so we might see a bit of an increase in Druid players. However, Druids got hit pretty hard in the playstyle department as well. All the spell Druids just stopped playing because that archetype doesn't really work anymore. So Druids and Rogues are in a weird spot where no one wants to play the class. And it's an odd thing. Like with Warriors and Priests, people wanted to play the class, it just didn't work as well. With these 2 classes, whether they're balanced or not, no one knows because no one wants to play them. That's the problem I'm having right now with Rogues and Druids. It's a bit of a design issue where they seem to, in the last patch, they managed to alienate all the people who enjoyed playing the class, but they balanced the class, but people don't want to play them anymore because the playstyle is different, and that's something which they're going to have to address in the next patch. But anyway, as for now, this has been Jotto. If you have any sort of comments or anything, you have any feedback, put it in the comment section below. I will put the information for Mana Grind in the description, and you can check out TeamSpeak and come on and talk to me if you want to. If you like the content, please subscribe. But anyway, as for now, this has been Jotto, signing off.